Welcome back to the Human Flourishing Project. I'm your host, Alex Epstein. Last week, which was the first episode, we discussed what to me is the most bothersome but also fascinating problem in the world, which is that human beings lack reliable access to the knowledge we need to flourish. And we went into a lot of depth on this, why this is a problem, how frustrating it is. I talked about having difficulty getting knowledge in just completely crucial areas like nutrition, psychology, also just how hard it is to figure out what's true in political issues, foreign policy, things that could start wars. It's just so hard to get real knowledge that we can be confident in and that we can confidently think we're going to flourish when we act on. So if you missed that, I'd recommend checking it out. The easiest way to get it is on the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/humanflourishingproject, facebook.com/humanflourishingproject, and you can see that. Now last week we just focused on the problem, and some people commented, it's a really interesting problem, but you just focused on the problem. And the reason was I really wanted us to appreciate and respect this problem, that we don't have this completely vital knowledge. But this week, we're going into solution time, and really the rest of the Human Flourishing Project, which I hope is decades, is going to be solution time. And today I'm going to discuss what I think the fundamental solution is. The fundamental solution to this problem of we don't have real knowledge of the kind that we need to flourish. And to indicate where I'm going to go, it involves focusing on and dramatically improving what I call our knowledge systems. Now, traditionally, the way we go about gaining knowledge if we're trying to flourish is usually what we do is we seek out new claims to knowledge. We look for new knowledge claims. So, for example, in business, it's very common if someone is struggling in business, they'll look for, what is the newest claim about business? Maybe that'll work. Or in psychology, they're struggling in psychology. What's the newest claim? Maybe that'll work. Or nutrition or relationships or anything else. There's this attraction to let's find a new claim because maybe that holds the solution that we've been missing. And my contention is that's not going to work. You may get lucky sometimes, but that's not going to work because the real problem is we don't have the right system for processing claims. We don't have the right knowledge systems. So my belief is that there are three kinds of systems we need. We need systems for acquiring knowledge, we need systems for explaining knowledge, and we need systems for applying knowledge. And today we're really going to focus on acquiring knowledge and what kind of systems we need. And I'm going to give you some examples of systems and processes that I use, and I'm hoping that you find those super useful. And then I hope that in the discussion on the Facebook page, you share some of your own systems and processes. Because although I have developed some things that I think are really useful, a lot more work needs to be done. And one of the benefits of a community is that everyone can participate and share their experience. So that's the agenda for today. But first, what I want to do is I want to talk about the amazing answers I got to the suggested assignment I gave at the end of last episode. So at the end of last episode, after I talked about human flourishing, how we want this kind of success that's both material and mental, that's an integrated success, I asked to help us think about what we're actually going after when we're looking for knowledge. I asked people to make a list of 7 words that best capture what you think human flourishing consists of. And I asked people to do this on the Facebook page, and as I'm recording this, there are at least 50 submissions, or around that, and I hope that there are a lot more. And these answers are just fascinating. And if I weren't trying to keep the time of this show down, I would read almost all of them because I find them all really, really interesting. But in general, I want to keep this to less than half an hour, and I'm quite sure that's not going to happen today. Hopefully the density of value makes up for it. So what I do want to do and what I need to do is I want to give you my answers because I promised to, and they might be interesting. And I'll just tell you what they are, and a little bit about why I chose them. Because if you look through the words that people chose, I mean, there are dozens and dozens of dozens, and you just say, oh, wow, yeah, I would like my life to be like that. So here are my 7, except I have to say I could not choose 7. So I chose 8 because I felt like I needed the 8th. And really, I almost feel like I need a 9th, but I'll stick to 8 and then maybe I'll throw in the 9th. But my 8 are, and I'll explain these in a second, but altitude, capability, connection, creativity, abundance, energy, joy, serenity. So altitude, capability, connection, creativity, abundance, energy, joy, serenity. Now, why those? Well, when I was thinking about my answer, I asked myself a certain question that I found helpful, and you might find it helpful too. And what I asked myself was, what are the key elements I want to experience, emphasize experience in the full process of life? Emphasize process. So experience and process were both really important to me, because when I think about flourishing, a way to make it real to me is just think about, okay, how am I experiencing that? What am I feeling? Now you can go about this in different ways. You could talk about words that you think cause flourishing, but what I wanted to get at is, how do I experience flourishing? And that's part of why I picked these. And then thinking about a process, the full process of life, was really helpful, because part of flourishing is that it is a process, and life is a multifaceted process. It has these different elements, including material and mental elements. And so it's useful to think, okay, across time, what are the kinds of experiences I want to be having? The kinds of things I want to experience, whether in the moment or in general. And some of them I won't experience at every moment, but I want these things continuously through my life. So that's why I picked them. So I'll just summarize them briefly in case any of them are useful. Altitude. Now, this is not one anyone else said, and it's arguably not even a real word in this context, but I really, really like it. And there's a reason I put it first, because I think it incorporates things like purpose, but I find it even more useful if I have to choose one word in the purpose realm. And I think of altitude as, I'm able to see the events of my life as a purposeful whole. So altitude is a high perspective. So it's metaphorical, but it's like I can see my whole life, and then I can see, okay, what do I really want? How do I get there? And then, this is really important, while I'm in it, how do I enjoy the process? And I think part of the process is understanding the meaning of any given thing that I do in my life. Even with a difficult day, when I have altitude, I think, okay, this is part of the story. This is part of the process. And of course, during the day, I want to enjoy that as much as possible. But I also want to have this view that, oh, I see, this is part of a broader thing. So I find altitude incredibly valuable. Next one, capability. So capability I experience as, I'm good, and I'm getting better at everything I need to flourish. So whatever it is that I need to be capable of, I feel capable of. Now, that doesn't mean I'm the best at it. It's not really comparative. It's just feeling like, okay, I can do what I need to do in life, and I'm expanding that capability. Connection. This is really important, and I'm putting it early in part because it cuts across just about all of these. So connection I think of as, I'm able to share what I love about life with others. I'm not too into different kinds of people these days seem to try to explain everything through evolutionary psychology, and I haven't studied that enough to have much of an opinion about it, but people are always saying like, oh, the caveman needed to do this, and that's why you feel that. And at least most times the reasoning does not impress me for the specific instances people use it. They seem to overuse it. But I think it is inherent in life that there are very fundamental things we get from being around other people and from connecting with them in certain ways. So I think a discussion of flourishing is incomplete without talking about connection. Now, creativity. I think of creativity as, I have a way of using my mind to sustain my life that fascinates me and motivates me. So I have a way of using my mind to sustain my life that fascinates me and motivates me. And for various reasons, I think that this is central to at least most people's lives if they're going to flourish. Just for me, I could not imagine not having a creative outlet, and the more I work on that to enjoy that, the more everything else falls into place, which is part of the reason it's super fun to prepare this. Not just super fun, but rewarding. I just feel like everything else in my life gets better as I do the thinking that goes into these episodes, and then the other aspects of the Human Flourishing Project that will emerge. Abundance. This is one that may be controversial to people, but I really value it. I think of abundance as I have the material resources to make the most of my time on Earth. A lot of frustration in life comes from experiencing scarcity, from not being confident that we have the resources to do what we want to do. And I think it's a great part of life, if it's integrated with everything else, to experience abundance. I think it's very, very connected to, for example, what people will call freedom. So this is one that's easy to get wrong, but if you get it right with the others, I think it just takes life to a different level. Energy. Now, you may think, if you know that my work is on machine energy, you may think I'm referring to that. Now, machine energy, in terms of our ability to figure out how to get machines to do work for us by giving them machine calories, that is a fundamental cause of human flourishing, but it's not part of the experience of human flourishing. But what is part of the experience of human flourishing is energy, and I include physical energy, and that's experienced in a certain form. I don't know the exact relationship between that and mental energy, but I mean both physical and mental energy. And that means I have the physical and mental energy to do what I want and to truly enjoy what I enjoy. And you may notice that in my list I didn't have health, and I'm really encompassing health under energy, because part of the experience of health is energy now and in the future. And I like, by the way, the combination I'll talk about in a minute, serenity. I like that combination of energy and serenity. Or I remember Jerry Seinfeld, who's one of my productive role models, he once talked about how in so many things in life you want to have energy and be relaxed. And I think, wow, that captures a lot of what human life at its best is. But before we get to serenity, there's joy. So joy is I experience the positivity of my life in a visceral, motivating, reinforcing way. So it's possible to see different things in life as positive, but to have a non-emotional engagement with them. And so I think of joy as not just random, but there's all of this positive stuff, and I want that. I want that reward experienced physically, emotionally, because that's so much of what life is. And without that, it's not really flourishing. And then the final one is serenity. So I think of serenity as there's an undercurrent of relaxation and satisfaction in my life. An undercurrent of relaxation and satisfaction. And this is definitely a challenging one. Not that the other ones are easy, but it's great to the extent that we can get it. And part of the reason for this show is we want to get knowledge about things like psychology so that we can have more serenity. Now, one quick thought on serenity is that I think that serenity is probably connected to authenticity. And authenticity as in being yourself, not in the sense of deterministically whatever I happen to be now, that's what I am in the future, but just owning your nature and not trying to hide from it at any given time. And I think this is important because at any given time, there are things that we would like to improve. And if we can't be authentic and own where we are now, I think it's extremely hard to be serene. So sometimes people think, oh, serenity means there's nothing negative, there's nothing that ever bothers me. I think that if people think of it that way, then that's going to be anti-serenity. So that's just Alex's riff about that, but it occurred to me, so I thought it might be useful. So those are my 8. Now, I mentioned a 9th. I just have to say it. A 9th, because I'm thinking, okay, does this really capture everything? And of course it doesn't capture everything, but do I think, oh, there's something missing? And I'm probably getting down a rabbit hole because I'll probably think of something else. But the 9th thing that I thought of was desire. It's not quite in any of these. And I think that part of human flourishing is just that amazing experience of wanting things, of being motivated, of just saying, yeah, I want to do that. And when we don't experience that, it's a big problem. So desire would be my ninth, and that's just cheating even more, but what the heck, it should be useful, I hope. All right, so that was my answer to the exercise. Now, one exercise you might do with this exercise, and of course these are words that we can modify at any given time, and at any given time in life we may want to just pick words that will emphasize what we think will help us most. So I'm not looking for an absolute definitional, canonical, so to speak, list. But whatever your 7 are, your 8 are, your 9 are, one thing you might do, and I do this, is you might try tracking them. So one thing I did starting about a year ago, I just turned 38. Actually, I guess I turned 38 when I recorded the first episode. It was Wednesday, August 1st. And I remember before my 37th birthday, I was just walking around and I started thinking about aspects of flourishing. And I decided it would be really interesting to track these. So I just made a spreadsheet and I put different variables down. It wasn't quite these because I didn't have them worked out that way at the time, but I put together some variables that I thought were really important, like altitude, and then just every day I'd rank them from 1 to 10. And I just found it incredibly helpful because it really focused me on flourishing. And as desirable as flourishing is, it's not at all an automatic focus. We don't naturally focus on it, or at least in today's world, we definitely don't default toward it. So there's this idea that whatever gets measured gets managed. So it could be worth it to try, hey, let's write those down and then track those. I found that mine went up quite a bit over the course of the year and generally stayed up because I was tracking them. And then as a bonus, a couple of bonus ideas. In my sheet, for whatever it's worth, I add 2 additional blanks. So I put one, when I rank all the things, at the end of it, I put one sentence on what I learned today about flourishing. So maybe I did something like didn't get enough sleep, and that just reinforces get more sleep. And then another sentence on what I'll do tomorrow to flourish more. So maybe get to bed earlier. And if you do that, then you'll just notice trends. And this will take you 4 minutes to do, but it could be really, really valuable. Now, if you want to get even more savvy, one more thing you might try to think about is, okay, in addition to these elements of human flourishing, are there any other variables I can track that are going to really strongly correlate to flourishing, but they're things I can control? Because you might think, well, maybe serenity I can't control directly, or maybe altitude I can't control directly. But for example, for me, I track one of the variables I track is mental continuity, which basically means lack of interruption. And I find that when I have mental continuity, that's very strongly correlated to altitude and serenity. And when I lack mental continuity, altitude and serenity are very, very hard to maintain, at least in a short-term day-to-day sense. So that might be worth trying as well. I think if you do start tracking these things, let me know how it works. But I think it's almost inevitable that you will improve, that your life will get better. So worth a try. All right, so that is the review of last time. Now that we're super focused on flourishing, let's jump into how do we solve this problem? The problem of we don't have reliable access to the knowledge we need to flourish. How do we actually get reliable access to the knowledge we need to flourish? Well, I'll start with why I think this problem can be solved. And the reason is because I think I've been able to solve it substantially myself, not overall at all, but in a particular field where 11 years ago I knew nothing, and where I was in the position of I really want real knowledge and I have no idea what it is. And that is the field of energy, or energy policy. So 11 years ago, I realized that energy policy is crucial to human flourishing, because energy is the industry that powers every other industry, and thus the policy decisions we make are going to profoundly affect human flourishing for good or bad. If energy is abundant, affordable, and reliable, everything else is going to get more abundant, affordable, and reliable. If it goes the reverse way, everything else is going to get worse. Things are going to be scarce, they're going to be less reliable, people are going to be poor, it's going to be bad. And it was frustrating to me that once I knew that energy is so important, I really didn't know what we should do, particularly with the issue of fossil fuels, because I knew that fossil fuels were the leading source of energy that we used, and we're in a world where 3 billion people still have almost no energy. So there's that on the one hand. But on the other hand, they're connected to a lot of serious environmental concerns. And so there's the idea, well, maybe if we don't use them enough, it's going to be a disaster. And if we do use them at any given amount, it's going to be a disaster. And it's a very tough issue because there are lots of technical questions, economic questions, certainly scientific questions. And I ran into, okay, how do I really know what's true, let alone put it all together? And it was very helpful, I think almost necessary but not sufficient, that my background and my real lifetime interest is philosophy, because philosophy studies knowledge acquisition. That's a lot of what philosophy does. The branch of philosophy, so to speak, called epistemology, theory of knowledge, studies knowledge acquisition. How do we get real knowledge? So it was good to have a background in philosophy, to have studied epistemology, to be thinking about these issues. But contemporary philosophy, for the most part, studies these things in a very abstract way. And there's not much focus at all on what we might call practical epistemology, or what I would call a practical knowledge acquisition system. How do I actually separate knowledge from non-knowledge? It wasn't easy to find. So what I found myself doing when I really needed to get knowledge in this field, to come up with recommendations that I would be confident would be good for human flourishing, I had to really analyze and improve a lot my own knowledge acquisition systems. So if you're interested in some of how I did this in energy, I gave a talk recently called Energy and Human Flourishing, which you can see on YouTube. And how this applies in energy is itself a big topic. But for the most part, I'm not going to talk about energy on this program, in part because you can see it there, and in part because unless we go into depth, a lot of the examples will be controversial, and I don't want to get distracted by the examples. But energy and human flourishing, if you're interested, more there. But I do want to share the lessons that I've learned, because those inform how I think about this whole human flourishing project, this project of seeking real knowledge about how to flourish. And so broadly, what I realized I needed was I need a better knowledge acquisition system. And by system, I mean an integrated set of processes that are designed to achieve a certain goal. So in this case, broadly speaking, was I wanted real knowledge that I could be confident would lead to human flourishing in action. And then I realized, okay, if that's my overall need, there are 3 things that I need within that system. There are at least 3 subsystems that I need in order to acquire the knowledge I need. And I would characterize those as I need a system for seeking knowledge of human flourishing, I need a system for validating knowledge of human flourishing, and I need a system for integrating knowledge of human flourishing. So seeking, validating, integrating. Now, each of these is a huge topic, and it's a fascinating topic, and I want to talk about all of these for years. But for now, I want to give you an outline, but I don't want to just give you an outline with no content. So what I'm going to do is do my best to strike a balance between saying something illuminating that intrigues you more for the future, but not just intrigue you. I want to give you an example or two of how I do each of these, and I'll try to pick examples where I think you can use them immediately. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you for examples of any processes or systems that you have in these domains. But I hope that at minimum you get excited about the prospect of focusing on knowledge systems, because I think this is really the way to go. As long as we're just looking for new knowledge claims, we're going to get not much, and we're going to make a lot of bad choices. But if we look for new knowledge systems and improved knowledge systems, then we're going to have something that allows us to find the right claims and process them, figure out what's true and what's not, and then put them all together so we just have an ever greater understanding of human flourishing in all kinds of different areas. So let's start out with seeking systems, or the capability of seeking knowledge of human flourishing. And more precisely, what we really need to seek is not knowledge of human flourishing, it's potential knowledge about what leads to human flourishing in a given field. And so psychology, nutrition, whatever, we first need to seek potential knowledge about human flourishing, which may seem like it's easy, but it's actually quite hard because most experts in most fields are not focused on human flourishing. They're not thinking of human flourishing as the goal. So they'll often talk about things that either have nothing to do with human flourishing or that are only part of the picture. For example, in nutrition, most of the claims that people make, leave aside whether they're true or not, most of them I'm sure are not true, mainly because they contradict each other, so most of them can't be true. But most of the claims to knowledge, they're usually focused on one variable, which is weight loss, or more precisely fat loss. So there's an obsession with that, but that ignores a lot of crucial parts of the picture. Certainly fat loss is not an end in itself, and maybe sometimes they'll focus on longevity. But to even start at getting the knowledge we need, we need to really look for knowledge about human flourishing. And here's a process that in this realm I find just incredibly helpful. And I'll just ask this question. There are two ways of asking it. You can see which one, there are probably more, but two ways of asking the same idea, and then you can see which one works for you better. One is, what does human flourishing mean in this area? So what does human flourishing mean in nutrition? Or what are my standards for judging whether something promotes flourishing in this area? So what are my standards, say, for judging whether something promotes flourishing in nutrition? So since we're using that example, I'll give you, for nutrition, I think about, okay, what are my standards for evaluating the impact of food on flourishing? And I think, what do I want to make sure that I get as a result of pursuing the right kind of food? And I have 6 that I use, and they're not going to be exactly the same for everyone, but I think you'll see that it gives it a richness that's going to allow us to seek knowledge in a much more effective way. So 6 of mine are energy levels. I want to know how it affects my energy levels. Lack of craving. So if I'm going to flourish with nutrition, I cannot just be craving all the time. Lack of internal conflict, which is often called decision fatigue. I want it to promote longevity. I want to have a good physical feel throughout the day. You might think of this as lightness. And then, of course, I want pleasant taste. So these are 6 standards that I think of. Okay, these are 6 standards for judging whether a given approach to nutrition is actually advancing human flourishing. And even if I just start scanning sources with these standards in mind, I quickly see, okay, most of these people who are talking about this are not really they're not talking about the goal that I have. So it's going to be a lot harder for them to be useful. So if people are just talking about fat loss out of context, that's not going to be useful. Or if I hear people tell me, oh, you've got this great diet, and they're just craving pancakes all the time, and they're kind of smiling about it, but you think, no, that is not flourishing. Of course, that's not going to sustain in most cases, or if it did, it would be miserable. So just by defining what flourishing means in a given realm, then we can really seek that knowledge. Lots of other elements of seeking, but that's a process that I find is super helpful, and I think it's something you can start applying immediately. So the first kind of knowledge acquisition we need is seeking. We need to seek out potential knowledge about human flourishing. The second one, and this is in a sense the core of it, is validating. We need systems for validating or invalidating potential knowledge, as I discussed last week a lot, separating knowledge from non-knowledge. And real knowledge is often being drowned by non-knowledge. I'm tempted in the spirit of the times to call it fake knowledge. Maybe I will. There is a real legitimacy to it being fake, so maybe that'll become a hashtag or something like that. See if you like it. But whether we're talking about non-knowledge or fake knowledge, that's dominating. And so we need some sort of systems for figuring out what's actually valid. And I'll give you one process that I use that I find really useful, and I think this is pretty rare, which is that I treat all new knowledge claims, so new claims to knowledge, as non-knowledge until proven otherwise. I treat everything new that I hear as non-knowledge until proven otherwise. there's a really dangerous tendency to think that we have to have an opinion on everything we hear, that we have to either agree with it or disagree with it. But usually, because of the poor way things are explained, that's at least one cause of this, is you just have no idea if it's true or not. And it's really valuable to put it in this state of non-knowledge, or you can even think of it as a state of limbo, where you're just saying, I'm not taking a position on this one way or another. I'm certainly not letting it into my head as this is something I know. I'm just putting it as this is something that I've heard. It's potential knowledge. If I'm intrigued by it, if it seems plausible for some reason or relevant for some reason, then I'll investigate it. But it's non-knowledge. And I find that when I do that, I'm just so much better off because I'm not absorbing anything or swallowing anything that ends up hurting me. And also it reinforces that I have to have really high standards, that I actually need to understand the things that I regard as knowledge. So by it being okay for things to be in limbo, for lots of things to be in limbo, to not have opinions, if someone asks me about, hey, this issue in psychology, what's your opinion? Or this issue with Russia, what's your opinion? And if I just say, I don't know, that's very, very powerful. Sometimes that's very, very powerful, first and foremost for our own thinking, but it also role models for others. And others will often admire when an intelligent person says, I don't know. So there's this compulsion to have an opinion all the time is a mistaken compulsion. So that's one thing that I find really valid. I have two other processes that I think will be useful, and both of these connect to the issue of experts. When we're looking for real knowledge, a crucial part of this is how we handle expertise or claimed expertise. And what I find is that people have one of two tendencies with expertise. They're either too obedient, so they say, oh, well, I heard that scientists say this or a study said this, therefore I believe it, or they're too dismissive of it. They'll say, oh, well, consensus doesn't matter, I have my own opinion, I'm an independent thinker, et cetera, et cetera. And both of those are not tenable because we need experts to study issues in depth and then to guide us through them. But if we have any kind of authority where we don't understand what they're saying and we follow it blindly, then we're just at the mercy of who knows what. And we've seen throughout history that so-called experts or even reports of experts, which is what we're usually exposed to, lead people to horrible, horrible things. So I have two processes that I use for dealing with experts, and I find both of these really, really helpful, and it really helps me learn quickly and find good experts and get good knowledge. So the first one is seek experts who give precise causal explanations. Every word of that is significant. Seek experts who give precise causal explanations. So I'll give an example from energy without getting into detail. I remember when I started studying the climate influence of CO2, which is what's emitted, among other things, when we burn fossil fuels for energy, that it was really hard to understand when people talked about the greenhouse effect and they'd say maybe, oh, it's like a blanket over the earth, but it was super metaphorical and vague. And then I remember I found certain experts who would actually explain what it was, and they would explain, hey, here's the mathematical function that it follows, and here's how we know that. And I just found that so empowering because then I thought, okay, I get this point. I understand what people are talking about. I understand it with precision. I understand the cause and effect. And therefore, to our next point, I'm going to be able to integrate that with other things versus just having some vague idea of a blanket or just hearing, oh, experts believe in this, you don't need to worry about the details, or saying vague things like, well, there's warming, well, but okay, how much and what kind of pattern does it follow? It was just so valuable to find those experts who gave precise causal explanations. And what I found over time is that the experts who did that, who regarded it as their job to explain versus to dictate, were much better thinkers in general and much more likely to be right because they had nothing to hide. And they wanted me to understand, or at least they really, really seemed to. Now, this by itself, none of these things by themselves are foolproof, but this one in particular, I think it works really well if you do the second process that I'm about to talk about, which is, in addition to seeking experts who give precise causal explanations, is seek experts who, and I'll explain this term, steel man not straw man. Steel man, not straw man. Straw man, the idea of erecting a straw man of your opponent is essentially to take an opponent's argument or a differing argument and to misrepresent it and then to attack the misrepresentation. And unfortunately, at every level I've seen of intellectuals, public figures, this is just incredibly, incredibly common. Certainly with my own work, I've seen people will just, it's not that there's nothing that anyone could take issue with, but so often people who start out on the opposite side and want to defend their position, they'll just start out by misrepresenting the view. So for example, in energy, not to go into too much detail, but if I say that I think fossil fuels are vital for the future of human flourishing, and I'm also an avid supporter of nuclear power and hydropower and really any kind of power that can be cost effective for human beings. And then people will say, oh, Epstein says we should always use fossil fuels and shouldn't use anything else. And that's just a misrepresentation. That's a straw man. And when you see people doing that for any position, you should be very, very suspicious. What we really want is steel man. Now, I learned this term from Sam Harris. I don't know who else uses it, but I think it's a good one, which is let's make the strongest version possible of the opponent's position, and let's deal with that. And imagine how valuable it would be if we had experts in these different fields who would portray the best view of others. For example, I have a fantasy, and I have an idea of how to make this fantasy come true, of in the realm of nutrition, I want all the different major theories. I want to have their experts respond to the best version of the theories of the others, particularly how people analyze studies. I want to see how each one analyzes supposedly the most definitive studies. And then I want to see with issues like how insulin affects fat gain, just to take one issue. I want to see the different arguments, and then I want each one to be challenged with the best argument of the other. And that's really, really hard to find. And one thing that we're going to do on this show eventually, assuming we can get enough support, it gets enough momentum, there's enough desire, is bring on experts and subject them to really, really rigorous questions, which I think can be even better than debate, which can sometimes get messy and personal, but to give them the best questions from the opposing opinions, then I think we'll really learn something, because I think then we'll see certain people break down and certain people stand up. But whether or not you have that, you can do a lot by just looking for the experts who steel man, not straw man. And in the realm of energy, when I had these processes, at least a little bit when I started studying energy, and I found there was one guy in particular, a guy named Peter Beckman, who was an electrical engineer who was just incredibly well studied on a whole range of scientific and technological and economic issues. What I found is he would give really good explanations of his opponent's views, and I just had so much respect for him, and I learned about energy really, really quickly, because he just gave such good explanations and he gave such accounts of the different schools of thought. And when I read the other schools, I found, wow, he's really representing them accurately versus they would not represent him accurately. And it just accelerated my learning. And almost everything I thought I learned from him, I believe now, knowing a lot more and having studied a lot more, I did actually learn. So that's the power of using these different processes for dealing with experts. So again, it's seeking experts who give precise causal explanations, and then seeking experts who steel man, not straw man. Now, the third capability, or the third type of system, I think is crucial to knowledge acquisition, is integration. It's integrating. We need to, so once we have sought potential knowledge, let's say we've validated individual claims, now we need to integrate those claims or identifications so that they all fit together. We need to know how they interrelate and apply. For example, let's say I see something, there's a study about insulin, that hormone, and how it's affected by different things. Okay, but now I need to know, how does that fit together in the whole picture? How does that fit together with things like calories and vitamins and hormone levels and gastrointestinal impacts? How did those fit together? And then how does all of nutrition fit together with the kinds of standards that I mentioned, like having energy and feeling good and longevity? How do these all really fit together? What I really want is to be able to see any given true idea in its full context. Because if I understand how all the ideas fit together, then I'm going to be able to apply them. Whereas if I just have a million isolated ideas, I'm going to have no idea how to use them in practice. Now, this is maybe the most complex of all the issues that I'm mentioning of how do we integrate knowledge, but there is a process that I think can get you a long way, and this is something that I've done for a long time and just found that it's the gift that never keeps giving, or at least the effort that never, sorry, I might have said it wrong. The gift that never stops giving. It's the gift that keeps giving, but it's really the effort that keeps giving. And it's that whenever I encounter a new claim that I think might be valid, and I think at this point it's habituated almost to the level it feels like an instinct, although obviously it's not an instinct, is I just ask with anything, hey, how well does this integrate with everything else I think I know? So if I hear something about, I just keep using this example of insulin, like how well does this integrate with everything I think I know? For example, I'm not taking a position on what ends up being the truth here, but let's say I hear, hey, it's all about insulin, eating starches spikes your insulin, and that's the key to fat gain. But then I also hear somebody say, well, if you look at all these studies, starch-eating populations are consistently thin. Okay, well, it's really important that I'm on the premise of integration, because then in part I can see, oh, wait, these both, as stated, can't be valid. So there's some integration between them. But it's not just that one is valid and one is invalid. That's sometimes true. But when we're on the premise of integration, we often learn nuance. We say, oh, well, part of that statement is valid and part is invalid, and then that's true of both, and then I can get a more precise one. For example, take in the realm of business or the realm of career. There's two contradictory pieces of advice you hear all the time. One is follow your passion, and the other is don't follow your passion. Find something you're good at, and then passion will emerge. Now, I think there's truth to both of those, but they're both stated in an overgeneralized way that's not very useful. And this is part of why, as I'll talk about in a minute, I think that we need much better knowledge explanation systems so that when people explain things they believe to be knowledge, they specify the context so that we actually know exactly what they're talking about instead of just a sloppy generalization that they made because they wanted to write a book quickly or they didn't want to package it correctly for someone else. Like, that's a big problem, and I want to help address that by helping different kinds of knowledge producers formulate things better so we can integrate them. But if you're on the premise of integration, even when somebody is sloppy about something, you can ask, okay, how does this fit with everything else? And often what you'll notice is that people say something that has truth, but it's overgeneralized. And then you can try to fit it together. So I don't have a grand theory of the passion thing, but you can say, okay, there's something there. So there is, and then figure out how to use it. So again, integration is a huge, huge topic because ultimately what we want all our knowledge about human flourishing to fit together in a way that we know what applies when to different kinds of situations. That's the goal, and there's so much that goes into that. But I think if you just use this process, how well does this integrate with everything else I know, you'll start to become an integrating machine. You'll discover a lot of contradictions in what people say. You'll discover a lot of nuance in different positions that seem to be opposite, and you'll really start to build up this context, and things will start to fit together. So those are the three big ones: seeking, validating, integrating. Those are three keys to our knowledge acquisition system. And I hope you think, as I do, that there's just incredible leverage at getting better at this stuff. If we can spend our time getting better at this, focusing on what are the knowledge systems we need to flourish, then the knowledge almost takes care of itself. Now, not quite, but we first need to focus on the systems, because we know that with the existing systems or non-systems, we do not get very far. So today my focus was on how we, as I sometimes will call it, students of life, or also knowledge consumers. Really, everyone is a knowledge consumer, and then about most things, because we don't produce new knowledge about most things or produce expert knowledge about most things. So we're all knowledge consumers. And as knowledge consumers, the most powerful thing we can do in terms of gaining the knowledge we need to flourish is we need to upgrade our personal knowledge acquisition systems. And so those three elements, those three subsystems are crucial, and hopefully those processes are helpful. The more we work on our knowledge acquisition system, the more real knowledge we'll get and the more we can flourish. So it's just, there's so much power there. I'm sure I've been clear enough about that, but it's just, there's just so much power there, and it's so frustrating that as a society we're just looking for new knowledge claims. And one big effect of this project that I want to create is, no, let's focus on knowledge systems. And if people think they have better ones than I do, I hope they do, because mine have a long way to go, and I want us to all work together, but we have to be working together on this problem. If we're working on let's find the next claim and then hope that it's true and hope it works, then we're not doing much constructive. So this is really good. And in a sense, this could be the Human Flourishing Project, which is giving knowledge consumers better systems. But imagine how much better life would be if not only we had good knowledge acquisition systems, but that knowledge producers, the people with the best knowledge, and that can be experts or that can be businesses that are producing the greatest value, imagine if they had far better explanation systems so they could explain why certain knowledge was really knowledge. They could explain how it fit in with everything else. They could explain the proof of things. They could explain why even the best version of other theories is incorrect. That would just be so great, because it would make our jobs easier. So that's why that's another piece of the Human Flourishing Project. If we're going to get this reliable access to knowledge, we need knowledge consumers to have a superior knowledge acquisition system, but we also need knowledge producers to have a far better knowledge explanation system. And that's what I'm going to be talking about next week. And then there's a third piece, which I'll also discuss soon, which is knowledge application systems. Once we have this kind of knowledge, how do we take what we know and translate it into flourishing on a day-to-day basis? There's the whole question of, okay, once we have this knowledge, how do we actually apply it? But I think you'll see over time that the better we can acquire knowledge, the more integrated and real our knowledge can be, the clearer it is to apply. So sometimes people think, oh, I know everything I need to, I just need help with application. I think that is incomplete. There's a lot to say about application, and I'm super interested in it, and it's probably it may be the one that I even know the most about among the three, but I think that at least on a societal level, it's the knowledge acquisition systems and the knowledge explanation systems that are going to produce the precondition for application. If you don't have really well integrated, valid knowledge, what are you working with to apply? So this is really exciting to me. I kind of hate when people just say, "Oh, I'm excited about this, I'm excited about that." But in this case, I can't resist saying I'm excited, because I can just see it. I can just see it, a world where we as knowledge consumers have much better ways of acquiring knowledge. I know that this is possible because I've already made a lot of progress myself, and there are so many things I don't know that I know are knowable. And then explanation, which we'll talk about next week, same deal. There's so much that people can do better in terms of explanation. And in fact, as part of my existing business is helping people explain things better. We're on such a frontier. And then application is the same thing. There's so much that can be done better. And that's the thing that gives me optimism about what's possible, and not just for my own life, which has already benefited a lot from these things, but just for human life in general, that there's just going to be a different level. And it's not some magical silver bullet type thing. It's not, oh, there's some new claim and you just follow this claim. No, it's that we're going to attack the problem on a different level. We're going to give people the systems that they're missing. And then when we look back, we'll say, oh yeah, this is why people were suffering so much, because they didn't have the systems. And then the knowledge was not at all obvious. It was complex. So how were they going to get it without the system? And yet instead we just tried to throw new knowledge claims at them. No wonder that people were super unhealthy a lot, and there's all kinds of addictions, and it's hard to know what to do about all these things because we didn't have the right systems as consumers to know what's true. We didn't have the right systems as producers to explain what's true, and we didn't have the right systems as anyone to apply what's true. So those are the three parts of the Human Flourishing Project. Now, they may change, but those three things in one form or another, they may expand, I should say. But those three, I think, are obviously crucial. And to sum them up, I'd say the current mission of the Human Flourishing Project, as I think of it, is to develop the knowledge systems humanity needs to flourish. To develop the knowledge systems humanity needs to flourish. And if I could add a couple words, it would be to develop and apply. Because I'm really interested in not just developing these things in a vacuum, but developing them by testing them out. And one thing I want to do on this program and with other work is to work with the world's best knowledge producers and to have their input on the systems and to get them to try things and to see what works and what doesn't. So it's not this development in a vacuum. It's very much development in collaboration, and it's development in collaboration with knowledge consumers, with knowledge producers. And ultimately what we want is we want to build up a real knowledge base that we have access to, that we don't just need to discover randomly. But first things first, we need to start at the systems level. We need people to start respecting these problems of the systems. We need people to start looking for better systems that include better processes. And if we get people on that premise, then we'll start to get better knowledge, and hopefully it'll be a kind of flywheel effect where it just keeps going faster and faster and faster because you get better systems, and then you get better knowledge, and that reinforces the systems, and people get better results, and so they're more motivated, and this approach just dominates. So I can't say I'm certain that this is possible, but it makes a hell of a lot of sense to me that it's possible, and it seems more worth pursuing than anything I can think of to keep pushing in this direction, because I've never found that working on my own knowledge systems is anything but super profitable, and thus I think it's going to be amazing to take time every week to explore these and then to get your feedback and your involvement. So today was all about why we need to upgrade our knowledge systems. That's the highest level takeaway. Now, as with the last show, and hopefully with every show, I want to end with next actions, because it's good to take some idea and then start to put it into practice. That actually helps with integration among other things. So here's my suggested assignment, and do this on the Facebook page, which has been a really great forum so far, and I'll post this on the page, and you can just add it as comments just like people did last week. So think about your personal knowledge acquisition system, and in particular, think about your validation systems. And here's the question I'll put on the Facebook page, which is, what's a process you find effective for separating real knowledge from non-knowledge? What's a process you find effective for separating real knowledge from non-knowledge? So I mentioned the process of starting things in a limbo state. I mentioned demanding clear, precise causal explanations from experts. And then I mentioned demanding that experts steel man, not straw man. So those are three. If you have versions of those or examples of those would be great. But I'm sure in your years of being alive, decades of being alive, you've found that, hey, this is really helpful. This really saved me from going wrong, or this, I really owe some good knowledge I have to certain process. It would just be really fascinating to do that. So do one. If you have more, have as many as you can. If there are any people you think have done great work in this field, definitely share that. We want to be as lazy as possible in terms of learning from each other and from what's already been done. The purpose is not at all to do new work for the sake of doing new work. It's just that I think a lot of new work, it needs to be done, or certainly the new work needs to be disseminated. So if we find someone who's figured out most of these systems or figured them out to a degree that none of us have, great, then we'll just promote them, and then we'll just start working from there. So again, go on the Facebook page and participate. And then if you find this content intriguing, you want to talk about it with others, share it, particularly the Facebook page, or you or friends can go to humanflourishingproject.com. It's still a pretty primitive site right now. It's just a landing page, but it'll collect your email address. That'll get you on our list. That'll make sure that you get notifications about new episodes, and you'll be all set. So that was part 2. This is a long intro set of episodes. I'm trying to break it up. I know that each one of these is dense, but hopefully there's a theme that you're able to take away, actions you're able to take away from each one. Next, I thought there were going to be 3 parts. There might be 4, there might be 5. It's all kind of the same stuff, but I'm just trying to give you an overview of the project. So next week, we're going to be talking about knowledge explanation systems. How when we know something, whether we're experts or just people of confidence that we know something, how we explain things in a way that allow other people to know that we're right and that the others are wrong. This is something that's so powerful and so important, and I'm looking forward to sharing what I know so far about that and then learning what you know in another community discussion. So that's the agenda for next week. Probably after that, we'll do application, and probably after that, I'll share with you the broad plan for the project, how I want you to get involved, how I want different experts to get involved, how I want businesses to get involved, and just talk about, okay, how do we make this something where we really do reach this goal of giving people the knowledge systems that they need to flourish. That's what's ahead of us. But until then, I'm Alex Epstein. This has been the Human Flourishing Project.